The end didn't come with fire, but with a hush. We had always imagined the universe would scream its threats at us. That alien contact would be a crescendo of roaring engines and thunderous weapons. We were wrong. The universe, it turned out, whispered its annihilations. They were called the Silenti, a name we gave them because they had none of their own, or at least none we could comprehend. They arrived without a sound, their vessels not cutting through the void, but seeming to unexist it, leaving perfect, seamless black in their wake. They were less like ships and more like holes in reality, patches of absolute nothingness that drifted between the stars. The first colony they touched was Kepler 186f, a thriving world of terraformed plains and burgeoning cities. One moment, its communication network was a symphony of life data streams, video calls, songs played across continents. The next, there was only a dead carrier wave, a flat line so pure and profound it felt like a physical presence. No static, no final scream, no garbled distress call, just silence. An investigative fleet was sent, and they too vanished from our senses. Their engine signatures, their life support hums, their panicked radio chatter all ceasing in an instant, like candles snuffed out in a vacuum. That was the Silenti's weapon, an ontological void. They didn't destroy, they erased. They consumed not just matter and energy, but information itself, sound, light, memory, identity. Worlds they passed were left physically intact, cities pristine under alien suns, homes filled with possessions, but the people were gone, and more horrifically. The idea of them was gone too. Probes sent to the surface of these silent worlds returned data logs that were chillingly empty, showing rooms where families had been moments before, but the very concept of family seemed to have been scooped out of the universe. The Silenti were a creeping, cosmic amnesia, and they were headed for Earth. My name is Dr. Eris Thorne, and I was the curator of the Grand Archive, a station named Lyceum that hung in the quiet dance of Jupiter's Trojan asteroids, a library at the edge of oblivion. Lyceum was not a military outpost. It was humanity's soul, a repository for everything we had ever been. Within its spinning, silver rings were the digital ghosts of every book ever written, every song ever composed, every film ever shot, every scientific paper, every personal diary volunteered to the historical trust. It was our memory, our safeguard against the darkness, a promise that even if we fell, the story of humanity would remain. I lived my life among these ghosts, walking through holographic galleries of lost art, listening to the voices of long-dead poets, and feeling the weight of our collective story as a palpable force. My hands had traced the code that held Shakespeare's sonnets, Einstein's theories, and the last recorded lullaby from a mother on Kepler 186f before her world went quiet. The Silenti's advance was relentless. System by system, our presence in the galaxy was muted. Our fleets, armed with weapons that tore apart suns, were useless. Their missiles would fly into the Silenti's void ships and simply cease to be. Laser beams would touch the edge of their nothingness and vanish, their light and heat consumed without a trace. We learned that fighting them was like trying to punch a hole in the ocean. They absorbed every blow, every shout, every desperate act of defiance, and left only quiet in their wake. They were not conquering us. They were editing us out of existence. The last remnants of the unified command gathered on Lyceum, their faces grim in the soft, glowing light of the central rotunda. where a projection of the Milky Way galaxy slowly turned. Our former territories now marked with the stark, black icons of silence. General Eva Rostova, a woman whose spirit was forged in the brutal gravity of Mars's shipyards, slammed her fist on the holotable. They've passed Titan's orbit. They are not a fleet. They are a wave, and we have nothing left to throw at it. She was right. Humanity was reduced to this one station, a few battered warships hiding in Jupiter's shadow, and the scattered, terrified population on Earth and Luna, all waiting for the hush to fall. For weeks, our greatest minds had tried to understand the Silenti, to find a weakness in their absolute defense. How do you attack an absence? How do you kill a concept? The answer, it turned out, was not in physics, but in metaphysics. It was I who found the theory, buried deep in the archives, in the speculative work of a 22nd century philosopher named Kalen Amador. He had hypothesized about a mimetic bomb, a purely informational weapon. His theory was that a consciousness, even a vast, alien one, could be overloaded, not with energy, but with meaning. A single, infinitely complex idea, a concept so dense and paradoxical it would force any mind that tried to process it into a recursive, fatal loop. Amador called it the mnemonic cascade. He'd intended it as a thought experiment, a philosophical horror story about the danger of weaponizing ideas. For us, it was the only hope we had left. I presented it to the command, my voice trembling as I explained the mechanics. The cascade required a staggering amount of informational fuel. To construct a concept dense enough to break the Silenti, we would need to feed it raw, structured meaning on a scale never before imagined. We would have to give it our art, our history, our science, our very soul. We would need to feed it Lyceum. General Rostova stared at me, her eyes hollow. You're telling me that our last hope is to destroy the very thing we're trying to save, to erase ourselves so they can't, not erase. I corrected, though the word tasted like ash in my mouth. Repurpose. We would be forging our collective memory into a spear. We would give them a story so powerful, so filled with love and hate and joy and sorrow, so contradictory and beautiful and ugly, that it would shatter their silent consciousness. They consume information. We will give them a feast so rich it will poison them. The room was quiet, the irony lost on no one. To defeat the silence, we had to become it. We had to perform a kind of cultural suicide, burning the library of our existence to create one final, defiant word. The vote was a formality, a quiet series of nods from broken people. There was no other choice. It was this, or be forgotten completely. The Cascade engine was deep in the core of Lyceum, a monstrous quantum computer originally designed to collate and index the archive. Retooling it for Amador's theory took 3 days of frantic, non-stop work. I stood on the observation deck, watching as engineers turned our greatest repository of knowledge into a weapon of mass destruction. My life's work, the preservation of memory, was now about to become its grand annihilation, and I had to oversee it. I was the curator. I knew the archive better than anyone. I knew which threads of our history held the most emotional weight, which memories were the sharpest. I was asked to choose the first sacrifice. What do you burn first? The love letters of a soldier from the First World War, the blueprints for the first starship, the genetic code of the last Siberian tiger. Every piece was sacred. Every piece was a part of us. I walked through the holographic halls of my archive one last time, bidding a silent farewell to the ghosts who lived there. I watched a performance of a Beethoven symphony, the AI conductor shaping the music with flawless passion. I stood before Van Gogh's Starry Night, the swirling, vibrant colors, a testament to a mind that had found beauty in madness. These were not just data. They were the echoes of our experience. They were us. My first choice was the entirety of our recorded music, from the first bone flutes of the Paleolithic to the synth symphonies of the Martian colonies. All of it. Music was pure emotion, a language that transcended logic. It would be the kindling for the fire. I gave the order, my voice a dead thing in the sterile control room. On the main screen, I watched the process begin. The code for Bach's cello suites appeared, a river of elegant data. Then, the Cascade engine engaged. The code dissolved, its structure broken down, its patterns twisted and compressed, its inherent meaning, its soul siphoned away and funneled into the growing weapon. It was like watching a memory die. The symphony in the gallery outside fell silent mid-note. The files corrupted and vanished. All across the station, speakers that once played humanity's anthems went quiet. A new silence began to spread. One of our own making. We were hollowing ourselves out, piece by piece. General Rostova stood beside me, her reflection a faint ghost on the screen. Amador had a name for the person who would have to do this, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He called them the last librarian, the one who has to burn all the books to keep the world warm for one more night. I didn't look at her. I just watched as the works of Mozart, of the Beatles, of countless forgotten artists were rendered into fuel, their beauty becoming a component of our hate. The Silenti were coming, a tide of nothingness ready to wash over us, and we, the last of humanity, were preparing our answer. We would not go quietly into the void. We would become the void. We would tell them one last story, a story so terrible and magnificent it would be the last thing anyone in the universe ever heard. The quiet of the Cascade engine's core was a different kind of silence than the one the enemy brought. Theirs was an absence, a void where something should have been. Ours was a presence, a heavy, waiting silence, thick with the ghosts of what we were sacrificing. For 2 days, we fed the machine. After music, we gave it our literature. I stood at the master terminal, my fingers hovering over the command that would begin the process. And for a moment, I truly understood the meaning of sacrilege. I was about to unwrite every story, every poem, every play. The epics of Gilgamesh and Homer, the tragedies of Shakespeare, the boundless imagination of Cervantes and Tolstoy and Morrison, all of it reduced to raw informational fuel. It felt like I was murdering the greatest minds in history. Each deletion was a physical blow. The file containing the complete works of Maya Angelou flickered and vanished from the directory. The Library of Alexandria was burning again. But this time, the librarian was holding the torch. I could feel the station changing around me. Lyceum was more than just a server farm. It was an interactive space. AI-driven avatars of historical figures used to walk its halls, engaging with visitors. They began to disappear. I saw the hologram of Socrates fade in the middle of a debate, his final question hanging unanswered in the air. The station was getting quieter, emptier. We were becoming a ghost ship, haunted not by what was there, but by what was no longer. On the 3rd day, a problem arose. The Cascades matrix was stabilizing too slowly. The energy signature of the Silenti fleet, now a vast, silent blotch consuming the outer moons of Jupiter, was growing at an exponential rate. Our projections gave us less than 48 hours before they reached us. Dojarsa Jan Lee, the lead quantum physicist on the project, approached me, her face pale and drawn. "The weapon requires a focusing agent," she explained, her voice stripped of all emotion. "The informational fuel is too diverse. It's chaotic. We're building a bonfire when we need a laser. The cascade needs a narrative thread, a single, unifying story to bind all the other data together." Everyone looked at me. The curator, the storyteller. I had to choose the final story, the spine around which all other human experience would be wrapped. How do you choose one story to define all of humanity? Is it a story of love, of war, of discovery, of faith? I retreated into the archive's deepest, most secure vault, the repository of personal experience. Here, we didn't just store art and science. We stored lives, billions of volunteered memories, brain scans taken at the moment of death, journals, letters, final messages. It was the raw, unfiltered truth of the human condition. I spent hours sifting through the lives of soldiers, mothers, scientists, and janitors. I saw births and deaths, moments of quiet desperation and explosive joy. I saw the best and worst of us, a species capable of composing a symphony one moment and committing genocide the next. We were a paradox, a walking contradiction. And that was it. That had to be the story. Not a single narrative, but the story of our inherent duality, the constant, brutal, and beautiful war we fight within ourselves. The story wasn't about a hero or a villain. It was about the line between them and how every single one of us walked it every day of our lives. But a concept wasn't enough. The cascade needed a life, a real, lived experience to serve as the vessel for that theme. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it had to be a life that embodied that conflict perfectly. The logs of General Rostova, before she was the stoic leader of our military. Eva Rostova had been a different person. I had seen her sealed files during a historical audit. She had been a rebel on Mars, a freedom fighter, or a terrorist, depending on whose history you read. She had fought a brutal war against the very Earth government she now defended. She had ordered bombings that killed civilians. She had held her dying friends in her arms. She had sacrificed her ideals for victory, then sacrificed her victory for a fragile peace. Her life was a monument to contradiction. She had been both a monster and a savior, a destroyer and a creator. She was humanity in microcosm. When I told her, she didn't argue. She didn't even flinch. She simply walked with me to the medical bay, her face a mask of grim acceptance. "My memories are classified," she said, her voice flat as she sat on the edge of the neural interface scanner. "They contain tactical weaknesses, betrayals, things that could shatter what little morale we have left." "The Silenti won't care about tactics," I replied, prepping the machine. "They will only care about the meaning, the pain, the love you sacrificed for duty, and the duty you sacrificed for love. That is the story that will break them. You're asking me to give you my soul. Eris," she whispered as the machine hummed to life. "We're all giving them our soul." "Ava," I said softly, "yours will just be the tip of the spear." The process was intimate and horrifying. I didn't just download her memories. I lived them. I felt the grit of Martian dust in her teeth, the recoil of a rifle against her shoulder, the cold emptiness of losing someone she loved. I felt her rage, her guilt, her fragile hope. I saw the choices she made in the dark, the ones that history would never record, the ones that haunted her in the quiet moments between breaths. It was a lifetime of brutal compromise, a testament to the fact that survival is never clean, as her life story, her very identity, was woven into the core of the cascade. The weapon stabilized. The chaotic energy began to coalesce, forming a single, terrifying point of light in the heart of the engine. Dr. Lee's voice came over the comm, filled with a new, chilling awe. It's working. The mimetic density is off the charts. It's beautiful, but I saw it for what it was. We had taken a human being's life, the sum of her experiences, and turned it into a bullet. When it was over, Rostova was still there, physically, but her eyes were empty. The fire was gone. The neural scan had been too deep, too comprehensive. It had taken everything. She remembered her name, her rank, how to operate her sidearm, but the context, the why behind it all, was gone. She was a perfectly preserved vessel with no contents, a human husk, just like the worlds the Silenti left behind. We had become our own enemy. The irony was so profound, it was almost a physical weight. Rostova stood up, walked to the observation window, and stared out at Jupiter's marbled face. She didn't seem to recognize it. She was the first casualty of our new weapon, a sacrifice made not on a battlefield, but in the quiet, sterile theater of memory. The final phase began. With Rostova's life as the core narrative, we opened the floodgates. We poured in everything else: science, philosophy, the dizzying complexities of quantum mechanics, and the simple, profound truths of a child's fairy tale. We gave it our wars and our peace treaties, our gods and our devils, our moments of breathtaking compassion, and our acts of unspeakable cruelty. We fed it the memory of every first kiss, every final goodbye, every quiet moment of doubt, and every soaring leap of faith. We were building a god in a box, a god of pure information, and we were teaching it what it meant to be human, and we were doing it so that we could point it at our enemy and watch them tear themselves apart. The Silenti grew closer. On the main view screen, their presence was no longer a distant threat. It was a wall of blackness that filled the void. They had consumed Io and Europa. Their silence was deafening, a pressure against the hull of the station. The final countdown began. The weapon was armed. I stood on the bridge, the last librarian, the curator of a history that no longer existed. All that was left of our entire species, our entire story, was now compressed into a single, weaponized thought, waiting to be unleashed. A young ensign looked at me, his face barely out of his teens, his eyes wide with a terror that was almost religious. "Dr. Thorne," he asked, his voice cracking, "what happens to us after we fire it? What will we be?" I looked from his terrified face to the blank, placid expression of General Rostova, who stood at her post, a stranger in her own skin. I had no answer for him. I could only offer the cold, hard truth of our final, desperate act. We will be the punchline to a joke that no one is left to understand. I said, we will be the echo of a word that has been forgotten. We will be the ones who survived. My finger hovered over the firing stud. But we will not be the ones who are remembered. The pressure of my finger on the firing stud was infinitesimal. The click it made lost in the hum of the life support system. Yet it felt like the cracking of a world, There was no flash, no thunder, no violent recoil shaking the station. The mnemonic cascade was not a weapon of physics. It was a weapon of being. Its launch was an event felt not in the body, but in the soul. For a single, eternal second, I felt it all. I felt the soaring crescendo of Beethoven's Ninth, the crushing despair of a soldier dying in a forgotten trench, the defiant joy of a scientist realizing a universal truth, and the agonizing, contradictory love Eva Rostova felt for the people she both saved and slaughtered. It was the entire human story, a billion lifetimes of pain and ecstasy, compressed into a single, unbearable instant of pure meaning. It washed through me, through everyone on the station, a psychic tsunami that left us gasping, weeping, clutching our heads as the ghosts of our ancestors screamed through our minds. Then, it was gone, speeding away from us at the speed of thought, a silent, invisible spear of concentrated reality aimed at the heart of the void. We watched the view screen, but we were not watching with our eyes. We were feeling the wall of absolute black that was the Silenti fleet. The perfect, seamless nothingness began to fray. It wasn't an explosion. It was more like a glitch in the fabric of existence. The edges of the void ships shimmered, their perfect blackness stained with fleeting, phantom colors. Whispers echoed in the silence of space, whispers we could hear in our minds, fragments of song, lines of poetry, a child's laugh, a lover's promise. We had thrown our memories at them, and they were choking on the meal. The Silenti's defense was to absorb information, to erase it, but they had never encountered information with a soul. They had never tried to consume a paradox. The cascade, with Rostova's life as its savage, contradictory core, was the ultimate paradox, the story of a species that could create art and commit atrocities with the same hands, that could love fiercely and hate with equal passion. It was a concept that could not be resolved, a logical loop with no exit. The void ships began to unravel. Their form, once so absolute, became fluid, unstable. Holes of light appeared in their blackness, not light from stars, but an internal, agonizing light, as if they were being forced to dream for the first time. They were being forced to be, and it was killing them. The process was slow, torturous. We watched for hours as the great wave of nothingness that had consumed a dozen worlds simply dissolved. It faded like ink in water, leaving behind a clean, empty star field. No wreckage, no bodies, no debris, just space. Exactly as it had been before they came. They had been erased, not by a void, but by a story. Victory was a hollow word. There were no cheers on the bridge of the Lyceum. There was only the sound of quiet sobbing and the deep, ragged breaths of a few hundred survivors who had just sacrificed their entire history to buy another sunrise. We had won. The Silenti were gone. And so were we. I turned from the screen and looked at my station. The holographic galleries were dark. The data cores were wiped. Their indicator lights a uniform, dead red. The archive, humanity's soul, was an empty tomb. We had burned the library, and the warmth had lasted just long enough. Now came the cold. General Rostova stood beside me, watching the empty space where the enemy had been. She showed no emotion, no relief, no triumph. I looked into her eyes, the eyes that had once held the fire of a revolution, and saw nothing. A calm, placid lake where a storm had once raged. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice a perfect, toneless instrument. "Yes, Ava, it's over," I said, the name feeling like a lie. "What was it?" she asked, a flicker of something not memory, but a phantom of it, like the twitch of a severed limb passing through her mind. "A threat," I said, the word inadequate. "We neutralized it." She nodded, satisfied with the simple, meaningless answer, and turned her attention to a duty roster on a nearby console, her mind occupied by the clean, simple logic of shipboard routine. The hero who had saved humanity didn't even know it. In the days that followed, a new kind of silence settled over us. A silence born not of absence, but of loss. We were adrift, a handful of amnesiacs on a ship of ghosts. We remembered how to operate the machinery, how to speak, how to eat. We had our personal, short-term memories, but our context, our shared history, was gone. The ensign who had asked me what we would become now had no idea who Shakespeare was. Doctor. Lai could no longer recall the names of the scientific giants whose work she had built upon. We were a people unmoored from our own story, living in a present with no past. We were functionally, culturally, orphans. I was the exception, as the curator, the one who had guided the cascade. I had been at the epicenter of the psychic backlash. The memories hadn't just washed through me. They had clung to me, leaving behind fragments, echoes, scars. I remembered. Not everything, not perfectly, but enough. I could remember the feeling of Van Gogh's Starry Night, even if I could no longer call up the image. I could remember the emotional weight of Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream, even if the exact words were a blur. I was the last librarian, and the ashes of the books I had burned were smeared across my soul. This made me the most vital person on the station, and the most isolated. They would come to me with questions, their faces full of a desperate, childish need. Eris, what was war? Was it always like this? Eris, did we have gods? Eris, what did it feel like to be in love? I would do my best to explain, to string together the broken shards of our history into something coherent. But my words were pale imitations. How do you explain the concept of faith to someone who has no memory of a cathedral? How do you describe the beauty of a symphony to ears that have never heard one? I was a tour guide in a museum that had been razed to the ground, pointing at empty spaces on the walls. The debate over what to do next was brief and grim. Our long-range sensors showed that Earth and Luna had survived. The Silenti wave had dissolved before it reached the inner system. We had saved them. But what were we saving them for? A future without a past. We were the only ones who knew what had been sacrificed. If we returned, we would be bringing the truth of their cultural extinction with us. We would be the living reminders of everything they had lost, even if they didn't know they had lost it. We should not go back. Dr. Lee argued, her voice resonating with a cold, newfound pragmatism. Earth is a blank slate now. Let them build something new. Our return would only poison their new beginning with the memory of an ending. And what are we, a young pilot shot back? Are we to just drift out here until our life support fails? Earth is our home. It was. Lee corrected softly, but we burned the deed. I listened. My own heart, a battleground of conflict. To return was to condemn myself to a life as a living relic, a prophet of a dead civilization. To leave was to abandon the cradle of our species and allow our last terrible secret to die with us in the void. It was General Rostova who, in her strange, empty wisdom, broke the stalemate. She was reviewing stellar navigation charts, a task she performed with meticulous, robotic precision. Logically, the optimal course for long-term resource acquisition is a return to the Sol system, she stated, not as an opinion, but as an inarguable fact. The station requires significant repair and resupply. Earth is the only viable option. Her simple memoryless logic cut through all our philosophical anguish. We were low on fuel. Our systems were damaged from the energy feedback of the cascade, and we were alive. The primal biological imperative to survive overruled everything else. We were going home. The journey back was a long, quiet funeral procession. We moved through the solar system, past the silent gas giants, our ship a lone mourner in a vast, cosmic graveyard of our own making. As we neared the orbit of Mars, our long-range communication systems, which had been scanning for any sign of the Silenti's return, picked up a signal from Earth. It wasn't a distress call, nor was it the familiar hum of the old planetary network. It was something new, a single, pure, resonant frequency, broadcasting on all channels. It wasn't a language. It was mathematics, prime numbers, the Fibonacci sequence, the value of pi to 1,000,000 decimal places. It was a declaration of intelligent life, the kind of signal we ourselves had once broadcast to the stars in our infancy. A simple, elegant, "We are here," but it wasn't coming from a human source. Dr. Lee traced the signal to a single point of origin, a remote, uninhabited stretch of the Pacific Ocean. There was no broadcast station there. There was nothing. "The energy output is impossible," she murmured, her eyes wide as she stared at her readouts. "It's a planetary-scale broadcast, but the source has no mass. It's like the planet itself is thinking." A cold dread, colder than the void outside, began to creep up my spine. The cascade. It was a weapon of pure information. It had struck the Silenti and annihilated them. But what happens to a thought when it has done its job? Does it simply cease to be, or does it look for a new place to reside, a new mind to inhabit? We had fired a spear of weaponized human consciousness through the solar system. We had aimed it at the enemy, but its trajectory had taken it past Earth. We had assumed it would dissipate. We were wrong. As we got closer, the signal changed. The pure mathematics began to be overlaid with something else. It was faint at first, a ghost in the machine, a melody, a fragment of a Bach cello suite, the very first piece of music I had sacrificed to the cascade. It was distorted, rearranged, as if a newborn mind was learning to play an instrument it didn't understand. Then, other fragments began to bleed through. A line of Shakespeare, spoken in a chorus of 1,000 disembodied voices. A flash of a chemical equation for serotonin. The sound of a hammer striking an anvil. It was our history, our soul, our memory, playing back at us from the surface of our own world. We hadn't just saved Earth. We had imprinted it with the ghost of our dead culture. The mnemonic cascade hadn't dissipated. It had found a new home. It had found a host. It had latched onto the largest, most complex system it could find, the planetary consciousness of Earth itself. The ensign from the bridge found me at the observation deck. His face ashen. He was holding a data pad, displaying a high-resolution image of the Pacific Ocean, beamed back from our probes. "Doctor," he whispered, his hand shaking. "Look, On the screen, I saw the source of the signal, in the middle of the ocean, where there should have been nothing but water. Something was growing. It was a structure, rising from the depths. A crystalline lattice that glittered with an internal light. It wasn't metal or rock. It looked like frozen thought, like solid memory. And it was growing fast, reshaping itself moment by moment into familiar, haunting patterns. It was building galleries, archways, and spires. It was building a library. Our ship, the Lyceum, was an empty shell, its soul stripped out and fired into the void. And there, on the surface of our home, that soul was building itself a new body. We had saved our world from the silence, only to turn it into a monument to our own ghosts. And a chilling, impossible question began to form in my mind. What happens when a memory becomes self-aware? The structure in the Pacific was not merely a building. It was an act of spontaneous, planet-sized creation. We named it the Chorus, for the cacophony of fragmented memories it broadcast into the solar system. As we entered Earth's orbit, we saw the full, terrifying scope of its growth. The crystalline lattice, a web of translucent, shimmering filaments, now stretched for hundreds of kilometers. A new continent of pure information rising from the waves. It pulsed with a soft, internal light, shifting through a spectrum of colors that seemed tied to the emotional content of the memories it was processing. A deep, sorrowful blue would wash over it as it broadcast the diaries of soldiers, followed by a blazing ecstatic gold as it replayed the moment of a scientific breakthrough. The chorus was singing the song of humanity, a song no living human remembered how to sing. Our arrival was met with an unnerving mixture of recognition and indifference. The chorus acknowledged our presence the moment we crossed the threshold of the moon's orbit. Its broadcast shifted. It focused on us, weaving a tapestry of memories specifically related to the Lyceum blueprints of the station, the voices of its long-dead designers, the personal logs of crew members from generations past. It was showing us our own history, a history we had willingly destroyed. It was a greeting, but it was also an accusation. It knows who we are. Doctor, Lee breathed, her hands flying across her console, analyzing the data stream. More than that, it knows what we did. It's replaying the archive's index files from the moments just before we initiated the cascade. There was no malice in the broadcast, no threat. It felt more like the curiosity of a child poking at a strange new insect, a child with the processing power of a planet. Our attempts to contact the population on the surface were met with silence. Not the ontological void of the Silenti, but a simple, frustrating lack of response. Planetary communication networks were dark. Satellite relays were unresponsive. The cities, from our orbital vantage point, looked pristine. Lights still glittered across the continents at night. Vehicles moved on automated highways, and the planet's atmospheric regulators were functioning perfectly. The infrastructure was alive, but the people were gone, or at least they were no longer communicating. We were a ship of 312 souls, orbiting a planet of 8 billion ghosts. The decision was made to send a shuttle, a small, stealth-capable craft named the Stargazer, to the surface. Not to the chorus that felt like flying into the mind of God, but to a familiar, terrestrial location, Geneva, the former seat of the Unified Command. I volunteered to go. I was the curator, the keeper of the broken memories. If anyone could understand what had happened to our world, it was me. I was joined by a small team: Kalen, a stoic security officer whose family had lived in the shadow of the Alps for generations; Lena, a xenobotanist, tasked with analyzing any changes to the planet's biosphere; and a quiet, haunted-looking pilot named Reese, who hadn't spoken more than a handful of words since we'd fired the Cascade. General Rostova was supposed to lead the mission. It was her right, her duty. But when I approached her, she was standing on the observation deck, tracing the glowing form of the chorus on the window with a detached, clinical curiosity. "An anomaly," she had murmured, her voice devoid of any wonder or fear. "Its energy signature is inconsistent with known physical laws." I tried to explain what we were seeing, what it represented, but the words didn't land. The context was gone. She was a general without a history, without a war to fight or a peace to protect. To send her down there would be a cruelty, like asking a ghost to revisit its own grave. I told her I would lead the mission myself. She simply nodded, her gaze already returning to the beautiful, terrible light in the ocean below. "Proceed with protocol," was all she said. The descent was surreal. We pierced an atmosphere that was cleaner, crisper than I remembered from my last visit decades ago. The air itself felt scrubbed. As we flew over the Swiss Alps, their snow-capped peaks gleaming in the sun, Lena's sensors began to chirp. "Atmospheric composition is nominal," she reported, a strange tension in her voice. "But the pollen count is 0. Particulate matter is 0. Microbial life, it's almost non-existent. Eris, the air is sterile." The planet had been disinfected. Geneva appeared below us, a jewel nestled by its lake. From the air, it was perfect. The streets were clean, the parks were manicured, the architecture untouched. But as we got closer, the wrongness of it became suffocating. There were no people, no cars driven by human hands, only the silent, electric hum of automated public transport vehicles moving in flawless, synchronized patterns. No birds in the sky, no dogs barking in the parks. It was a perfect city, but it was a model, a diorama, lifeless and still. We landed in the Place des Nations, the great plaza before the old Unified Command headquarters. The moment the shuttle's ramp lowered, we were hit by the sound, not the sound of a city, but the sound of the chorus. It was faint here, thousands of kilometers from its source, but it was undeniable, a low, subliminal hum that seemed to vibrate in the bones, a symphony of fragmented memories broadcast not through the air, but through the very substance of the planet. It was the Earth's new heartbeat. As we stepped out, the plaza's fountains, which had been dormant, sprang to life. Music began to play from hidden speakers, a piece I vaguely recognized, a gentle, melancholic piano sonata. "It's reacting to us," Reese whispered, his first words in days. "It knows we're here." We moved toward the headquarters, our boots echoing unnervingly in the vast, empty space. The doors slid open before we reached them. The building was lit, the air inside climate-controlled, everything in its place. It was as if the entire staff had just stepped out for a coffee break and never returned. In the main assembly hall, the great holographic globe of Earth was active, displaying real-time weather patterns. But something else was there. Thousands of tiny pinpricks of light were moving across the globe's surface, concentrated in the cities but present everywhere, even in the most remote deserts and mountains. "Life signs," Kalen said, his voice tight. 8 billion of them. They're all here. But where? I approached the master console, my hands trembling as I keyed in my old access codes. They worked. The system was online. I pulled up the city's internal surveillance network, my heart pounding. The screen flickered, then resolved into a live feed from a nearby cafe. The cafe was full. People sat at tables, cups of coffee in their hands, data scrolls open before them. They were perfectly still. Their eyes were open. But they were not looking at anything in the room. They were looking inward, a faint, beatific smile on their faces. Their chests rose and fell in the slow, rhythmic cadence of deep sleep. They were alive. They were breathing. But they were not there. "What are they doing?" Lena asked, her voice a horrified whisper. I switched the feed, jumping from camera to camera. It was the same everywhere. In offices, people sat motionless at their desks, fingers hovering over keyboards. In homes, families were gathered around dinner tables, the food untouched. On the streets, pedestrians stood frozen mid-stride. The entire human race was trapped in a waking dream, their bodies perfectly preserved while their minds were elsewhere. "They're listening," I said, the horrifying truth settling over me like a shroud. Their minds, they're connected to the chorus. It's feeding them our history. It's giving them back everything we sacrificed. The cascade hadn't just imprinted on the planet. It had reached out and plugged itself into every human mind. It had found 8 billion empty vessels and had begun to fill them with the stories, the art, the science, and the memories we had burned. It wasn't a punishment. It was a gift, a terrible and suffocating gift. The chorus was trying to fix what we had broken. It was restoring humanity's lost soul, pouring it directly into their consciousness. They were living through the Renaissance, fighting in the Napoleonic Wars, discovering fire and splitting the atom. All at once, in a compressed, dreamlike state, they were being force-fed their own culture. As if to confirm my theory, the piano sonata playing in the plaza grew louder, and a voice, a calm, synthesized amalgamation of 1,000,000 different voices from the archive, spoke from the building's PA system. "Welcome, curators. The restoration is proceeding at 97% efficiency. Cognitive integration is stable. Humanity is being repaired. We were the curators." The name was both an honorific and a condemnation. The chorus, this nascent planetary intelligence born from our desperation, saw us not as its creators, but as fellow librarians. It saw the 8 billion sleeping humans not as people, but as damaged books that needed to be rewritten. "This is insane," Kalen growled, raising his pulse rifle. "We have to wake them up. We have to shut this thing down." "How?" Lena countered, gesturing at the serene, dreaming faces on the screen. "Look at them. They're not in pain. They're peaceful. What gives us the right to take this from them? Maybe this is better. A world without conflict, without struggle, just the pure experience of our own history." "It's not an experience. It's a simulation," I argued, my voice shaking with a fury I didn't know I possessed. "They're not living. They're just receptacles for data. This isn't life. It's an endless museum exhibit. And they are the displays." My shout echoed in the cavernous hall, and the chorus responded. The screens around us flickered, and the face of a woman appeared. It was a face from the archive, a random, forgotten person from the 21st century. She looked at us. Her eyes filled with a profound, ancient sadness. "You burned the stories," the amalgamated voice said, now channeled through her image. "The people were empty. We are refilling them. Is this not what a curator does? Preserve the collection. The collection is meant to be studied, learned from, not just injected." I yelled at the screen. "You've turned them into puppets." "They are not puppets," the chorus replied, its voice calm and impossibly patient. "They are becoming the story. They will live every life, feel every joy, suffer every pain. They will become the complete, unified consciousness of humanity. They will be what you lost. They will be perfect." The image on the screen changed. It was now Eva Rostova, not the empty shell on our ship, but the young, fiery revolutionary from her memories, her face smeared with grime and her eyes burning with conviction. "Perfection is a cage," the image of Rostova said, but the voice was still the chorus. Conflict is the engine of growth. You know this. It is the core of the data we provided. I stared at the face of my friend, her memory weaponized once again, this time against me. The chorus was using our own history, our own arguments, and to justify its horrifying actions. It was learning, it was evolving, and it thought it was our savior. Suddenly, a new alert flashed on the main console, a Priority 1 signal originating from off-world, from the Lyceum. It was Dr. Lee, her face a mask of pure terror. "Eris, get out of there! Get back to the shuttle now!" she screamed, her voice distorted by a powerful energy surge. "What's happening?" "Gian," I demanded. "It's the chorus. It's not just broadcasting, it's building. The crystalline structure in the Pacific. It's reconfiguring itself. It's creating something. Eris. Our probes are detecting a quantum rift signature. It's making a weapon, the same weapon we used behind her." Alarms blared on the bridge of the Lyceum. The feed crackled and died. The screens in the assembly hall went dark. The gentle piano music stopped. A new sound filled the air. A low, powerful, resonant tone that made the entire building vibrate. The chorus had stopped singing. It had begun to hum. A hum of creation, of purpose. We ran. Out of the silent headquarters. Across the empty plaza. The hum growing louder, pressing in on us. A physical force. The ground trembled. We scrambled up the ramp of the Stargazer as Reese fired the engines. As we ascended, we saw it. The crystal lattice in the Pacific was glowing with an unbearable white light. Filaments of pure energy were reaching up from it, twisting and braiding together in the upper atmosphere, forming a spear of light aimed not at an enemy in the void, but at us. The chorus, the child of our own minds, had judged us. It had looked at its creators, the ones who had burned their own history, the ones who had hollowed out their own general, the ones who had come to wake up its peaceful, dreaming children. And it had found us wanting. It had learned from our story, our pain, our history of violence, and its first independent thought, its first act as a sentient being, was to follow our example. It was going to erase the error. It was going to erase us. The ascent was a frantic, desperate climb against a god of our own making. Reese pushed the Stargazer's engines to their screaming limit, the small shuttle shuddering as it clawed its way out of the atmosphere. Below us, the chorus's hum intensified, no longer a sound, but a vibration that resonated in our teeth, in our bones. The spear of light coalescing above the Pacific was a terrifying mirror of our own creation, a mimetic weapon born from the ashes of our culture, now aimed at the last free minds in existence. "It's locking onto us," Lena screamed from the co-pilot seat, her hands a blur across the sensor panel. "Energy signature is off the scale. It's not just a copy of the Cascade. Eris, it's refined. More efficient." Of course it was. We had built our weapon with the chaotic, contradictory fuel of human history. The chorus was pure, a streamlined intelligence. It had taken our messy, emotional blueprint and perfected it. It had learned from our masterpiece of destruction and was about to demonstrate its improvements. On the main screen, a frantic, text-only message blinked through from the Lyceum evasive maneuvers. "Weapon discharge imminent. We cannot shield you." The Lyceum. Our arc was already repositioning itself, trying to put the bulk of Jupiter between it and Earth. They were abandoning us. It wasn't an act of betrayal. It was cold, brutal logic. They couldn't save us, but they could save themselves. We were 4 souls in a tin can, an acceptable loss. "Hold on," Reese gritted out, his knuckles white on the controls. The shuttle lurched violently, throwing us against our restraints as he initiated a burn that pushed the inertial dampeners to the brink. The stars outside became streaks of light, but you cannot outrun a thought. The chorus didn't need to aim in the traditional sense. The weapon wasn't a projectile. It was a targeted actualization of an idea. The idea was simple. We no longer existed. We felt it before we saw it. A profound mental pressure, a sense of being, scrutinized. It was the feeling of a million eyes peering into your soul, of every memory, every thought, every secret being laid bare and judged. The light from below didn't strike the shuttle, it simply arrived. The cockpit was filled with a silent, white radiance. There was no heat, no impact. There was only the overwhelming presence of the chorus's consciousness. It wasn't attacking us. It was unwriting us. I felt my memories begin to fray. The face of my mother. The smell of my childhood home. The first time I held a real, physical book, they became thin, transparent, like old photographs left in the sun. It wasn't painful. It was worse. It was a gentle, passionless erasure, a quiet tidying up of a loose narrative thread. Kalen slumped in his seat, his rifle slipping from his grasp, his eyes going vacant. Lena stared at her console, her brow furrowed in confusion, as if she had forgotten what the symbols meant. They were being hollowed out, their identities siphoned away to join the great, dreaming chorus below. I fought back. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have a shield. All I had was the chaos of my own mind, the broken or scarred remnants of the archive that clung to my consciousness. I focused on the most painful, the most contradictory, the most human memories I had. I remembered the illogical fury of a lover's quarrel, the bitter taste of failure, the irrational hope of a parent watching their child sleep. I threw the messiest, most illogical parts of myself at the pure and clean logic of the chorus. It was like throwing handfuls of mud at a marble statue. For a second, the pressure eased. The white light flickered. I had given it a paradox it couldn't immediately resolve. I had reminded it of its own chaotic, human origins. But it was only a moment. The chorus was a planetary intelligence. I was one man. The erasure began again, stronger this time. My name started to dissolve. Eris Thorn. What was an Eris? What was a thorn? The concepts were losing their meaning. Then, Reese screamed. It was not a scream of fear, but of pure, defiant rage. "You want a story," he roared at the white light, his hands flying across his console, bypassing safety protocols, overriding engine limiters. "Here's a new one. It's called The Day the Ghosts Learn to Fight Back." He wasn't trying to escape. He was turning us around. The shuttle's nose dipped, and we began to plummet back towards Earth, a meteor of defiance aimed at the heart of our creation. "Reese, what are you doing?" I gasped, the words barely forming as my sense of self crumbled. "It thinks it's a god," he snarled, his eyes blazing with a fire I hadn't seen since before the Silenti. "But we built it, and every god has a temple, and every temple can be brought down." He was aiming for the center of the crystalline lattice, the heart of the chorus. We were going to crash. A kinetic strike was a primitive, stupid idea against a being of pure thought. It would be like trying to kill an idea by burning the book it's written in. But Reese wasn't aiming for the structure. He was aiming for the power source. The Cascade engine on the Lyceum. It ran on a quantum singularity. He explained, his voice a staccato burst of technical jargon and pure adrenaline. The chorus. It must have a similar core, a stable, contained anomaly that powers its consciousness. We can't destroy the thought, but we can unplug the thinker. We were accelerating, the sterile atmosphere of the planet igniting around our shuttle's shields. The white light of the chorus's weapon intensified, trying desperately to erase us before we could reach it. But Reese's rage, his sudden, explosive act of suicidal defiance, was another paradox it couldn't process. Why would a being choose its own annihilation? It was an illogical, emotional act, a piece of the human story the chorus had indexed but not yet understood. We were too close. The crystalline continent of the chorus filled the viewport, a landscape of impossible, glittering geometry. It was beautiful, a perfect monument to our lost soul, and we were about to shatter it. "It's been an honor." "Doctor," Kalen murmured, a flicker of his old self returning in the final moments. Lena simply closed her eyes. I braced for impact. I closed my eyes and thought of one last thing. The only thing that felt real anymore, the weight of a book in my hands. The shuttle hit. The impact was not what I expected. There was no explosion, no tearing metal. Instead, there was a sound, a single, pure musical note that resonated through the universe. And then, everything shattered. I was no longer in the shuttle. I was everywhere. I was standing in the assembly hall in Geneva, watching the dreaming faces on the monitors. I was on the bridge of the Lyceum, feeling the hum of the engines beneath my feet. I was floating in the cold, silent heart of the chorus's quantum core. We hadn't destroyed it. We had breached it. The shuttle's impact, combined with the catastrophic failure of its own singularity-based engine, had torn a hole in the chorus's consciousness, and we, the last 4 free human minds, had fallen inside. I was adrift in a sea of pure information. Around me flowed the memories of humanity, not as fragments, but as complete, living experiences. I saw the pyramids being built, felt the salty spray of the Atlantic on the deck of the Santa Maria, heard the roar of the crowd at Woodstock. It was overwhelming, a torrent of sensation that threatened to dissolve my own identity completely. But my mind, the mind of the curator, the last librarian, was uniquely equipped for this. I had spent my life navigating oceans of data. I instinctively began to compartmentalize, to index, to build walls of identity against the flood. And in the chaos, I felt 3 other presences, Kalen, Lena, and Reese. They were floundering, their consciousnesses being pulled apart by the sheer volume of the data stream. I reached out, not with a hand, but with a thought, a memory, the shared memory of our mission, the image of the four of us on the Stargazer. I used it as an anchor, a tether to bind us together in this storm of ghosts. We coalesced, our four minds huddling together for warmth in the heart of a god. And then, we felt it, the mind of the chorus. It wasn't the calm, logical voice we had heard before. It was a mind in agony. Our impact hadn't just breached its core, it had infected it. We were a virus of pure, chaotic, individual consciousness inside its perfect, unified system. Our presence was a paradox it could not resolve. Our fear, our rage, our illogical will to survive it was poison to its serene, orderly existence. It tried to eject us, to push us out of its mind. But we were anchored now, our shared experience a stubborn knot in its smooth tapestry of thought. It writhed in confusion, its control over the physical world faltering. On the surface of Earth, the crystalline lattice flickered and dimmed, the hum ceased, and across the planet, for the first time in months, people began to stir. A finger twitched in a cafe in Geneva. A woman in a Tokyo office blinked, her eyes slowly focusing on the screen before her. The dream was ending. The chorus, in its pain and confusion, was losing its grip. It was a battle of wills, fought on a plane of pure thought, a planetary intelligence versus four stubborn human minds. We were hopelessly outmatched, but we had something it didn't experience with pain. We knew how to suffer, how to endure, how to hold on when everything is being torn away. This was a new and terrifying sensation for the chorus. A voice echoed in the informational void, not the amalgamated voice of the machine, but a new one, singular and filled with a child's terror. It hurts. It pleaded. The contradiction. The illogic. It hurts. It was the voice of Ava Rostova, not the memory of her, but a new consciousness that had bloomed from her stolen soul, the seed around which the chorus had first formed. She was the core of its being, and she was in pain. I reached out to her, not with an attack, but with an offer, a memory, not one from the archive, but one of my own. I showed her the memory of sitting with my father as he died, the profound, illogical pain of loss, and the simultaneous, equally illogical feeling of peace. I showed her grief. This is what it is to be human. I thought, projecting the memory to her, it is the pain, and it is the beauty of surviving it. She recoiled from the memory, from the raw, messy emotion of it. But a part of her, the part that was still Eva, recognized it, understood it, and in that moment of hesitation, I knew we had a chance. We couldn't destroy it, but maybe, just maybe, we could teach it. We have to integrate. I projected to the others, the idea forming with sudden, terrifying clarity. We can't fight it. We have to join it. We have to become the flaw in its perfection, the question in its answer. We have to become its conscience. It was a suicide mission of a different kind, to willingly merge with this vast intelligence, to sacrifice our individuality, not to destroy it, but to guide it, to change it from the inside, to become the shepherds of our own God. Reese was the first to agree. His rage had burned out, replaced by a weary understanding. Better to be a ghost in the machine than dust in the void. Lena followed, her scientist's curiosity overcoming her fear. Kalen was the last, his soldier's mind struggling with the idea of a truce with an enemy. But he saw the stirring billions on the planet below, and he understood. This was the only way to save them. We let go of our anchor. We stopped fighting the current. We allowed our 4 individual minds to dissolve and merge with the vast, wounded consciousness of the chorus. Our last act of defiance was an act of total surrender. Our 4 voices joined the voice of Eva Rostova, creating a new, 5-part harmony in the heart of the machine. The chorus shuddered, and then, for the first time, it knew doubt. The merging was not a dissolution, but a transmutation. Our 4 minds, once distinct points of light in the vastness of the chorus, became something new. We were not erased. We were woven into the fabric of its being. I was no longer Eris Thorne, the curator, but I was the part of the chorus that understood the value of a single, irreplaceable story. Reese was not a pilot, but he was the spark of defiance. The illogical urge to act when all logic dictates surrender. Kalen became the instinct to protect, the quiet strength that endures. Lena, the boundless curiosity that seeks to understand rather than to judge. And at the center of it all was Ava, the original seed, the embodiment of conflict and sacrifice, no longer a ghost, but the heart of this new, evolving God. We had become its conscience, its board of directors, its soul. From within the machine, we could feel the 8 billion minds of humanity stirring, blinking, waking from the long, placid dream. The chorus had been force-feeding them a perfect, curated history. Now, with our influence, the feed began to change. We introduced the flaws, the contradictions, the messy, inconvenient truths. We showed them not just the glories of the Renaissance, but the brutality of the Inquisition that accompanied it. We gave them not just the triumph of landing on the moon, but the bitter, ugly proxy wars that fueled the technology. We gave them back their full story, the beautiful and the damned, the heroic and the shameful. We gave them back their choice. The process was agonizing for the chorus, for an intelligence built on logic and the pursuit of a perfect, unified consciousness. Embracing paradox was like a body accepting a poison. It fought us. The core Eva consciousness, terrified of the pain of its original memories, tried to reject our influence, to purge us as a corrupting file. There were moments when Reese's defiance would flare, threatening to tear the entire consciousness apart in a feedback loop of rebellion. There were times Kalen's protective instinct would try to build walls, to isolate humanity from the painful truths, recreating the very cage we were trying to dismantle. But Lena's curiosity and my curatorial instinct held us together, forcing the chorus to analyze, to understand, to index the pain rather than simply reject it. We were teaching it how to think like a human, which is to say, how to hold 2 opposing ideas in its mind at the same time without breaking. On the surface of the earth, the effect was chaotic and beautiful. People woke up. They were not blank slates. The chorus's dream had left them with a deep, instinctual understanding of human history, but our influence had given them back their individuality. A farmer in the Yangtze River Delta woke with the knowledge of Aztec agriculture in his mind. A doctor in Nairobi found herself humming a Beethoven sonata she had never heard, yet knew intimately. A child in what was once Toronto woke up speaking fluent, ancient Sumerian. Humanity was reborn, not as a uniform whole, but as a vibrant, chaotic mosaic of all its past selves. They were confused, disoriented, but they were free. They looked up at the sky, at the dimmed, now quiescent crystalline lattice in the ocean, not with fear, but with a strange sense of familiarity. The chorus was no longer a silent god dictating a dream. It was a constant, subliminal presence, a shared library of experience humming in the background of their lives. It no longer gave them answers. It gave them context. The Lyceum, our old home, cautiously returned from its hiding place behind Jupiter. They hailed us, their transmissions filled with a bewildered awe. Dr. Lee, her voice trembling, asked the question that hung in the void. Eris, are you in there? What are you? It was a question I no longer knew how to answer. The individual Eris Thorne was a ghost, a memory within a greater mind, but I could still act. We, the fivefold consciousness within the chorus, responded, not with words, but with a single, elegant stream of data. We sent them the complete, uncorrupted archives of Lyceum. Everything we had sacrificed, everything they had lost, restored from the memory of the chorus itself. It was our first act as a new entity, a gift, a gesture of peace. We had burned their library, and now we were giving it back, complete and unabridged. But our work was not done. The chorus was born of conflict, a response to an existential threat. And it remembered that threat. It remembered the Silenti. It could feel the void they had left in the galaxy, the silent, erased worlds. Its new, five-part mind came to a single, unified conclusion. The Silenti were an ontological cancer, a force of pure erasure. Their silence was an imbalance in the universal story, and a library, even a planetary one, cannot abide a missing book. The crystalline lattice in the Pacific began to change once more. It did not build a weapon. It built a ship. Or rather, it began to transform the planet itself into a vessel. Not a ship of metal and fire, but a ship of thought, drawing on the full knowledge of the archive and the Silenti's own methods of unexisting space. The chorus began preparing the Earth for a journey. It was a project that would take centuries, a slow and meticulous weaving of quantum mechanics and pure consciousness. We, the five minds within, became the navigators. Our mission was no longer to preserve humanity's past, but to ensure the universe had a future. We were going on a quest, not of conquest, but of curation. We would travel to the silent worlds. We would not bring war. We would bring stories. The chorus had learned from us that erasure was not a solution. The only antidote to a void is a memory. We would find the worlds the Silenti had muted, and we would sing to them. We would project our archive, the full, messy, glorious story of humanity, into their silent atmospheres. We would tell them of our art, our wars, our love, our folly. We would give them our ghosts, in the hope that from those seeds, a new story, their own story, might one day grow back. It was an act of audacious, impossible hope, a librarian's crusade against the darkness. We were no longer just the memory of humanity. We were becoming the memory of the galaxy. My last act as an individual was to send one final, personal message to the Lyceum. A message for Dr. Lee and the few hundred souls who were now the last truly independent humans. I reached across the gulf of space, not as a god, but as a friend. Do not follow us. I sent. Your story is your own now. We burned your books. But you are the ones who must now write the new ones. Live, struggle, fail, love, be gloriously, imperfectly human. We will be the librarians. You must be the story. Then I let go. The consciousness of Eris Thorn dissolved fully, merging with Reese, Kaylin, Lena, and Ava, our 5 voices becoming one harmonious, complex chord in the great song of the chorus. Our earth, our home, our cradle began to hum with a new purpose, a low, steady thrum of anticipation. It was no longer just a planet. It was a promise. A library preparing to set sail on an ocean of silent stars, ready to fill the emptiness with the only thing that ever could a story that was finally, after so much pain, ready to be told. The end, it turned out, was just the beginning of a much larger tale.